Hello, and happy Thanksgiving. I am the social solipsist, and I am recording this literally on Thanksgiving at 2 minutes past midnight because I just finished watching Let the Right One In at the request of my friend Spencer, with whom we have been exchanging movie suggestions or directives or orders, whatever term you want to use. Um, after our last exchange, he pointed me at this film, and it's been one that's been on my list for quite a long time, but I haven't gotten around to watching for a variety of reasons, but not the least of which being um, I expected it to be, rightly so, a movie that you have to be in a very particular mood to properly absorb. Whether or not I was in that mood remains to be seen. I literally finished it, 5 minutes ago. A little longer than that, because it took me it's been long enough that I boiled more water and made myself another cup of decaf Earl Grey. You'll have to excuse the state of my voice at the moment. It has been a long and stressful week at work, and I've literally been running a fever for like 36 hours. So, yeah, it's whatever. I'll live. Yeah, so this movie, Let the Right One In. Boy, I'm to be perfectly honest, I'm struggling a little to even know where to start with this, which perhaps sounds more negative than I intend it to be. This movie is pretty great, but it is a struggle to address. It is a Swedish film, and it is touted as a romantic horror. And we might as well start there as anywhere else. I would not call this a romantic film. I would not call it a horror film. For a variety of reasons. First and foremost is it's about two 12-year-olds, and that's super uncomfortable to even consider. But I think I understand at least where that idea of it being a romantic film comes from. I think it's calling it romantic is a bad way of addressing the fact that it has to do with topics about coming of age and understanding of oneself and others, and relationships between people and the society that they live in. I also wouldn't call it a horror film, because despite some reasonably gruesome scenes, it doesn't strike fear. It's not particularly menacing. I think it tends closer towards a drama, although that's a very catch-all term, than it does towards a horror film. Certainly one of the introductory scenes, I'm going to try and keep this reasonably spoiler-free, not intentionally, but only because it doesn't really require me to address specifics too much, to still discuss everything I think I want to discuss. But I'll try and signpost it more if I stray away from that. Anyway, one of the earliest scenes is probably the most gruesome in the film. It's very blatant. It's not voyeuristic, which is, I think, something that a lot of American Hollywood slasher flicks tend to do. They like glorify the, killing and dismemberment and whatever else, to what I would call a voyeuristic extent. Whereas this is at times a very gruesome film, but usually does it with a level of artistry or nuance or subtlety that even though you're very uncomfortable with what is happening, and it is very explicit. It is not, the camera does not linger excessively, or the camera framing is not shot in a way that glorifies the nature of the gore or of anything else. So if it wasn't abundantly clear, this is a vampire film of sorts. But it's also, in a sense, this gets praised as a great vampire film, and there's things about it that I think, the vampire-ish nature of it is done very well. Whether or not it is a vampire film, I don't know. That's a hard question to answer. It seems very much to be a tertiary kind of plot driving factor, more so than the focus of the film, even though the whole film is framed around that aspect of Ely, one of the characters. It is not overdone, and it is not it's not dissected, but it's very well explained and presented at exactly the times it needs to be, and not really a whole lot more. That said, well, where do I go from here? There's a couple of different ways I could go with this. So I guess we should talk a little bit about the plot as a whole in a very general sense. And then we'll sort of get into characterization. The plot is hardly a plot. But that is not necessarily to the detriment of the film as a whole. On the whole, the film, although it does not necessarily present itself this way, I would say is more of a character study of a variety of characters. And it does a surprisingly good job for a film with the scope that it has of including a variety of characters with different relationships and different plot lines of their own that intertwine in both meaningful ways, both to the characters and to the general story being told. There are some exceptions to that, bits that I think could have been possibly cut or reworked or something like that. This is based on a book, and as if I understand correctly, the screenplay was written by the author. But yeah, and as I understand it as well, there were some quite a few reworks from the original material. But there's some points where I think there are scenes or shots that could have been omitted that weren't necessary. But generally, the themes of the story and the characters therein really address themes of, I think, adolescence and dealing with relationships both as children and adults, and the nature of trauma and abuse and a variety of other very uncomfortable topics. I actually probably should have led with that. If there's one thing this film is, it is through and through uncomfortable. Um, and as far as the characters themselves, um, pretty much all of them are to some extent sympathetic, but at the same time, none of the characters are good people. Um, and I think this is really interesting because it is a little bit exaggerated, not in terms of the campy kind of exaggerated, but rather a subtle reduction of characters to their most gray elements, if that makes any sense, and really examines the specific internal struggles that various individuals have, and their coping mechanisms, and their loss of control, and the types of passions that people find that flare up in them. Um, and that gets a lot of the characters into a lot of uncomfortable situations. And coming back to the topic at hand being the vampirism, they really land a lot of those points, a lot of the points about the vampiric curse, or whatever the nature of it is, being something that is uncontrollable, and a struggle to bear, and impacts the way that various people interact with one another, and the society as a whole as a result of the aftermath, and a whole lot of other things. It's not, the vampirism is not painted as a almost like a superpower, as it is in most vampire media, I would say. It is very much it's not a curse. It's not the woe is me version either. It's very much, this is just what I have. This is what I live with. And there are coping mechanisms to deal with that, and to work with the burden of living with that, and the people around you having to deal with the repercussions of that. But it is not at any point, even when they do delve into the fantastical elements of it, it is never presented in a fantastical way. They do a very good job of keeping it, I don't want to say grounded, because it's hard to say that under the circumstances, because it's very clearly, the strong, a strong version of the vampire mythos, where adherence to a lot of the tropes is kept, pretty strict, but also it's not glorified in any way. Anyway, I think I'm going around in circles a little on that. I want to say more about the characters, but it's hard to, I'm still absorbing a lot of it. The characters are all really they're hard to like, but they're also hard to hate. They're surprisingly nuanced, despite a very limited amount of dialogue that goes on in the film, and even a general limited amount of interaction. I would say a great amount of the film's effect actually comes from the methods in which it's filmed. And props to the DP and the cinematography folks, and lighting, and all that. There's some really extraordinary cinematography going on in this film, that is relatively unusual, I would say, in most certainly in Hollywood cinema, but even in general, it's got some. I don't want to say a shirking of typical cinematography, but there's a lot of very planted camera shots with limited movement, if any. Lots of wide shots with extended extended scenes on in a single cut. The close-ups are done in certain stylistic ways. It's very, very infrequent that it's done as shot reverse shot. Close-ups are frequently on two people together or one person with the other off screen. A narrow focal depth is also very frequently used, which I think adds, not only increases the effects of some of the very nice lighting that they use, but also implies both a level of intimacy and gives a, no pun intended, a focus to the scene to direct the viewer's focus from to the way that the characters relate to one another. Having a shifting focus of the focal depth from one character to another, or from a character to an object or a place or something like that. Can, even when it's very small, can do an immense amount to direct how you read the scene. And there's some pretty extraordinary stuff in there. It's not all amazing, but it's often quite good. The CGI, or let's just say the effects in general, are almost all extremely good and very subtle. The one that got me immediately is in a very early scene when Eli, let's go with Eli because I think that's how they pronounce it, jumps down from this jungle gym, and it's just adjusted enough to make it unsettling. It's done very well. I will say there are two exceptions to my feeling about the effects, and those are, let's call it the cat scene, and parts of the pool scene, which I think are probably have some of the most dramatic effects. Both of those scenes have some of the most noticeable and dramatic effects, and they are rough. Or the parts of them are rough. The former I almost wish did not exist in the film. It is weirdly comical with how poor it is. So, yeah. Yeah, as far as what else can I talk about? I mean, it's a struggle. It's a struggle to absorb this film because so much of it is incredibly intimate, and a lot of that I think you can chalk up to the performances of the actors, and credit where it's due. I make it no secret that I'm not particularly fond of children in general, but I'm even less of a fan of child actors because they're almost universally bad. Now, obviously, what I'm about to say is moderated a bit by the fact that they are speaking Swedish, and I don't speak Swedish. So, whether or not they are emoting entirely believably is hard for me to say. But from from my perspective, they play the roles very believably, and very to the characters that they are meant to be playing, shall we say. Oscar in particular does a very interesting job of swapping between sort of these different sides of his life, and depending on who he's interacting with and how he's feeling from moment to moment, can dramatically change the way he emotes and the way his facial expression and the way that he speaks. And that's a very believable thing for, a young child, a middle schooler, struggling to find identity and place, and deal with the unpleasantness that comes with growing up in general, especially under the circumstances with which he's being forced to deal. But he also plays the monstrous side of himself with surprising deftness and ease. And I think I don't know what the nature of the filming process was or anything like that. But it certainly seems like the directors, or the whole filming process certainly took its time to get the right people and get the right shots and get all that to where it needed to be. Yeah, it's just it's a lot to absorb. Oh shit, my computer just went to sleep because I've been speaking for too long. Yeah, I mean, I'm really trying to digest the part where I want to be sympathetic to some of the characters and I just can't find it. They are, like I said at the beginning, that everyone in this film none of them are really good people. But you sort of understand where most of them are coming from and the struggles that they have, even if they're reduced to some level of one note nature of some level of tropes. There's always a subtlety that moderates that. But it's hard to like them. It's hard to like any of them. Yeah. This film's definitely going to stick with me, for better or for worse. And whether or not I think I could watch this again, now is not the time to ask that question, but it's a hard watch. And there are parts of it that I think, for a lot of people, might hit on very personal levels. Yeah. Anyway. I swear I had something else to say. Just as a wrap up. I mean, I've said a lot of it already, but I really admire the subtlety of how this film plays out. Like I said, it does go a little long. It does have a few scenes that probably could have been cut or adjusted or something like that. And it is a slow burn, to turn a phrase. But it always seems to be with a pretty good reason. And it doesn't, I could certainly feel that if the same plot beats had been rushed through more, that not having that appropriate breathing room could certainly damage the experience pretty substantially. There's, I gotta address. There's some aspects about the film that I think were left nebulous because they didn't necessarily want to address them. And they may have been addressed in the book more explicitly. I don't think if you've seen the film, I don't think I need to tell you which ones I'm thinking of or which relationships I'm considering, or let's say explanatory shots that raise more questions than they answer. And some of them are a little jarring, and they felt like it felt a little like the author, that being the screenwriter, really wanted those in, whether or not they were entirely appropriate. But on the whole, the movie is otherwise so good that, it's hard to fault it for some oddities here and there, especially when addressing such hard topics, even from, a side angle. Anyway, yeah, I'm glad I watched this film. I don't know if I can watch it again, but I do recommend it. Yeah, I probably should have. I wanted to get this out before Thanksgiving, and I wish I had given this a little more breathing room so I could absorb it better and not be sick when I'm doing it. But here it is. Here's your review. Ask me questions if I left anything out. Anyway, so now that we're coming to the end, I'm going to suggest that in response to this suggestion, the next film that Spencer should watch, in trying to be a little on the lighter side of things, should be 2014's What We Do in the Shadows. So, I look forward to seeing the review. Oh, that's enough time. See, you thought I forgot, but I didn't forget. I was also asked to review the music video for Aiden's Let the Right One In. Well, it's a 3 minute and 31 second music video with a very simple musical structure and a very simple lyrical structure that's very repetitive. So I don't have a whole lot to say about the music itself. Honestly, I don't have a lot to say about the rest of it either. But that's okay. There are some obvious visual cues that indicate the connection between the song / music video and this film or the book. But either for budgetary or other reasons, the connection is tenuous at best, I guess. To be perfectly honest, I can't get over the fact of all the garbage they did in the music video that would have been annoying to other people to deal with, like sprinting down the street and almost knocking coffee cups out of clearly strangers' hands, and then running in the middle of the road in front of cars, and burning a 12x4 in a park. Or a 4x12, whatever it's called. Yeah, it yeah, I don't have a lot to say here, but I feel compelled to say something. It's not my cup of tea. I could have seen in a different part of my life where this would have spoken to me in a different way, but at the moment, nah, not really. But there's, I don't know, it's not without merit. I guess that's like the horribly limited thing to like that is the best I can muster for it. But anyway, there's your review of Aiden's music video for their song Let the Right One In. I just can't think of anything other than Beyond Two Souls. God damn it.